A North Korean diplomatic delegation led by Vice Foreign Minister Myong-ho took off for Mongolia over the weekend. The meeting is the first of its kind since the start of the pandemic nearly 4 years ago. We turn to Bruce Klinger for more. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, North Korean delegation taking off to Mongolia. What significance does that trip by the North's delegation carry?
North Korea has slowly been opening its borders after the COVID crisis, allowing some visitors in. And this diplomatic mission is to affirm the importance of relations between North Korea and Mongolia. Mongolia has traditionally been a close supporter, a close diplomatic contact with North Korea. So we've seen in recent weeks or recent months, North Korea has been affirming its relations with China, with Russia, and now with Mongolia. So it's a way of building its friendships. But at the same time, North Korea has been closing down a number of its overseas embassies, likely because they were no longer able to provide funding for their own operations, as well as illicit activities, which is then sent back to the North Korean regime.
Right, so widening its circle, but that's also in line with how European embassies in the North that left the regime due to the pandemic are gearing up to make a return to the North, right?
Right. So as North Korea is slowly opening its borders, it's been allowing several groups of Russian tourists to come in, and now it's allowing the foreign diplomats who left during the COVID crisis to come back to Pyongyang to begin preparations for reopening those missions. So it's sort of, North Korea is one of the last countries, I think, to reopen its borders after the COVID crisis.
Right, and also UN officials are making a comeback to the regime. Would you say the North is ready to receive the much-needed aid now, then?
We'll have to see. During COVID and even before that, the U.S., South Korea, and international organizations were offering assistance to North Korea, and the regime rejected it. South Korea offered rice, and the U.S. offered COVID assistance and COVID vaccines, and the international organizations also offered that, and North Korea rejected that. So I think it's still a little bit up in the air as to how much North Korea will be opening to these international organizations, or how receptive it'll be for aid, even though it would, greatly assist the North Korean people.
Definitely. Now, in the meantime, South Korea and the U.S. have been carrying out their joint military drill since last week. And I have to point out, unlike last year, the North hasn't really staged any major military provocations, which is a good news. But why do you think the case is the case now?
Well, we've seen a bit of a mixed reaction. On the one hand, North Korea hasn't done provocative exercises very close to the DMZ or their northern limit line as they have in the last 2 years. And they've said that their military is too busy engaging in construction projects. Now, on the other hand, they are engaged in their annual winter training cycle, which usually runs from December through March, which doesn't get a lot of publicity. Everyone tends to blame the U.S. and South Korea for military exercises, but ignores the annual North Korean exercise. But also, in the last few days, North Korea has engaged in a very large artillery and multiple rocket launcher firing demonstration, but it was, I think, 50 kilometers or so back from the DMZ. So it wasn't provocative in the sense of looking like it might lead to an attack on the South. But many of us still think that this year is going to be a bumpy year, that we may see increased provocations by North Korea sometime during the year. And South Korean officials told me privately that they can't rule out another tactical deadly attack, as we saw twice in 2010.
Right, especially ahead of the big elections coming up, both for South Korea and the U.S. Now, instead, the leader Kim Jong-un was seen taking a shooting position with a rifle last week and ordering that practical, actual war training be intensified. Would you say it's a downgraded show of discontent over the joint drills?
Well, as I said, we've seen large-scale artillery exercises, and those were really, I think, more of a demonstration of military power rather than exercising actual war plans. The way they lined up the artillery, sort of, hubcap to hubcap, is not how you would use them in war. They'd be very easy targets for Allied forces. But I think it's a way of showing North Korean power, the Kim Jong-un's power, and the North Korean defiance of the international community. And then, of course, when Kim goes to these military units and fires rifles and other activity, it's a way of showing that he's the military leader and that his own strength. So that's, I think, a demonstration for the internal North Korean audience.
Right. Before I let you go, last Friday, Seoul's Unification Ministry announced 3 major tasks for the year. What's noticeably different about this year is the ministry's statement about letting the world know about the reality of North Korea. What does this say about the Unification Ministry's plan to deal with North Korea issues for the rest of the year?
Well, talking about the real nature of the North Korean regime is a continuation of how the Yoon administration has resumed criticism of North Korea's terrible human rights conditions and violations of international norms of behavior, but also in response to North Korea's statements earlier this year that unification is now really a dead issue or a dead dream, that the two Koreas can't really reconcile as a single entity. So now South Korea has sort of abandoned the previous federation or confederation ideas and will be focusing more on having a liberal democracy in a unified Korea. And that's consistent with Article 4 of the South Korean Constitution, where a unified Korea should be based on the principles of freedom and democracy.
Definitely. All right. Thank you, as always, for your insight. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.